his first landfall in the New World. A statue honoring Christopher Columbus is found outside Union Station in Washington, D.C. The Columbus Monument declares that it was the faith and courage of Christopher Columbus that gave to mankind a new world. Yet for years, researchers have wondered why American historians have given such credit to Columbus when there were others who had reached the New World earlier.
Columbus in 1492 only got as far as the Caribbean islands.
Even the ceiling of the state capitol acknowledges the coming of the Vikings. Historians argue that Leif Erikson made it to the New World some 500 years before Columbus.
You do have history. You just don't recognize it.
Or could it be that the recognition is intended to represent something else? After all, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, he did so with sails bearing a red cross on a white background, the symbol of the Knights Templar. These same ships are found painted on the interior ceiling of the U.S. Capitol. When they were arrested, the Templars were accused of devil worship, a charge that has been a point of controversy to this day.
Many hundreds of knights were captured, they were tortured, and that makes a lot of their confessions rather suspect. However, I think the old saying is where there's smoke, there's fire. And it is interesting that in England, the Templar Knights were not tortured. They were interrogated, but they weren't tortured because that was against the law in England. And some things do emerge. One is that they do seem to have been required as part of their ordeal, their initiatic ordeal, if you will, to trample on the cross and spit on the cross. Also, they were alleged to have worshipped this god Baphomet, and which is either described as a three-headed deity or as a skull or as a goat-headed being. And those things, I think, were probably true.
While mysteries abound concerning the relationship of the Templars to Masonry, the connection was clearly made by Albert Pike. In front of the Masonic House of the Temple are two 17-ton sphinxes, cut from single blocks of stone. One representing wisdom, with its eyes half closed, as if in contemplation, while the other represents power, with its eyes wide open. These two chief elements are said to represent Plato's ideal balance for the perfected man.
The man who has wisdom and the man who has power.
To the Scottish Rite, Albert Pike seems to represent such a man, as he is a central focus of the temple itself. A bust of Pike is featured at the top of a stone altar in the main hall. Next to it are Pike's own words: "What we have done for ourselves alone dies with us. What we have done for others and the world remains and is immortal." But exactly what immortal works Pike did for others and the world remains an issue of constant debate among critics of Masonry.
Albert Pike is a favorite whipping boy of conspiracists.
Like the Templars who came before him, Pike's real beliefs are often questioned, and with him, the beliefs of Masonry.
Albert Pike was a Luciferian. Literally, Luciferianism is the core, the center core of Freemasonry.
Pike's body is buried inside the temple itself, with this stained glass memoriam, next to a bust of his likeness.
And they revered him so much that they actually dug him up and buried him in a wall underground. And you go to the house of the temple and there's an actual room dedicated to Albert Pike.
The Albert Pike room is located in the lower level and is filled with Pike's many books, a number of portraits and photographs, the pipes, memorabilia, and even the death mask of the man thought by many to be America's most important and notorious Freemason. In his lifetime, Pike would have seen the completion of the U.S. Capitol and the Washington Monument. He lived much of his life in Washington, D.C., and devoted himself to the promotion of Freemasonry. Indeed, some have argued that Pike's controversial form of Masonry was the result of a radical struggle that occurred during the years just after the American Revolution. But how did this struggle come about, and what was its purpose? More importantly, could this influence have somehow impacted the design for Washington, D.C., and with it, the ultimate destiny of America? The answer to these questions may be found by examining a group that today has much to do with Washington, D.C., one that is thought by some to be the most mysterious and dangerous secret society in the world.
General William Huntington Russell was at a university in Germany, studied the ways of a secret society that is sometimes spelled S-C-U-L-L, asked permission to transfer it to North America, and he did. And that is the beginning of Skull and Bones.
Some 50 years earlier, during the time of the American Revolution, Germany had been the home of a secret order that many claim would be responsible for all the wars and conspiracies of the next 200 years. Could William Russell have become involved with a remnant of this German society?
He also is on record observing that American Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism had drifted from their European origins and roots. And as a drift, they were losing sight of the secrets or of, the mandate, the purpose, and the protocols of their existence. So he formed Skull and Bones to reconcile these arcane orders with the mainstream European movement.
During this era, the mainstream European movement, especially among secret societies, was on fire with a concept of revolution, which involved overturning old systems of government, monarchies, and the influence of organized religion in particular. In the birth of this revolutionary philosophy, Germany played a key role. In his book, Fire in the Minds of Men, James H. Billington, the Librarian of Congress, writes that the revolutionary ideology of the 18th and 19th centuries was shaped not so much by the rationalism of the French Enlightenment, as is generally believed, but by the occultism and pro-romanticism of Germany. He goes on to say that this ideology continued through the reign of men like Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler. Billington writes of what he calls the Pythagorean passion of the early revolutionaries, a fascination with the ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras. According to tradition, Pythagoras was driven from Greece to southern Italy, where he allegedly founded a religious and philosophical brotherhood to transform society. Pythagorean philosophy dominated the signs and symbols revolutionaries used to define their movement. Billington writes that occultists became politicians and made special use of the two most important Pythagorean geometric symbols, the circle and the triangle, in dramatizing their challenge to establish power. In Germany, the print for politicized Illuminism, written during the first year of the French Revolution, was entitled Pythagoras. Pythagorean geometry plays an important role in the design for Washington, D.C. The entire layout of the city is based around Federal Triangle, a right triangle which represents the Pythagorean theorem. Could this have been the influence of Adam Weishaupt and the revolutionary faith of the Illuminati? And if so, in what other ways could this mysterious and highly controversial group have impacted America?
The Illuminati was an organization created in Bavaria. A Freemason named Adam Weishaupt created the Illuminati as an inner circle of Freemasons. And he was very definitely taken by the period of the Enlightenment. He saw liberal democracy and liberal government, not liberal in the sense that we use it today in political talk, but liberal in the sense of giving rights and freedoms to the citizen, as an important way to improve the world. And his plan was to create this inner circle of Masons called the Illuminati, that means the enlightened ones, and that this inner circle of Freemasons would then spread out among Masonic lodges, and then the Masons in turn would see to it that their members were put in prominent positions in government, and that then the Illuminati's influence would enable the liberal democratic principles of the Enlightenment to be spread throughout the world.
It had three ideals: separation of church and state, controls on the power of the state, and the emancipation of women. Three planks in their platform, if you will. Now, one could say that the Bavarian Illuminati won, because that, in effect, defines Western society.
Because the Illuminati plan to change the world in many ways came to pass, some believe the order functioned through the revolutionary movements of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. The cry for revolution around the world seems to have impacted all the countries of Europe and spread beyond to Russia, China, North Korea, and Cuba. But most controversial is the society's influence in America, something hinted at in the very date in which the Illuminati in Germany was founded.
I think they were supposedly formed in 1776, the same year of the Declaration of Independence.
And the Illuminati was established as an organization, you know. He says, no longer are we going to take the orders of the monarchs in 1776. Now that's a pretty important date, isn't it?
Now, you made reference to 1776 and the Illuminati. Can you draw a line?
I do associate the two because the language was so symbolic. It's too direct and too precise not to know that these people who envisioned such a new world were actually combined in the underground secret societies of Europe.
Fire was an important symbol to the revolutionaries, who were determined to destroy the old world in preparation for the new. As one of them declared, with a match, one does not lift up the world, one burns it. Weishaupt's Bavarian Illuminati sparked the flame of the revolutionary faith, but some researchers believe that at some point their flame was put out.
They lasted about 10 years. Now, what lasted for centuries after them was the rumor and reputation that there is a secret inner circle of Freemasons that are plotting to take over the world. John Robison in Scotland wrote a book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, where he talks about how the Illuminati are trying to take over Masonic lodges, and Masonic lodges are trying to take over the world.
But the American lodges, by and large, externally, as we know, did not accept that because it wasn't needed. However, it doesn't mean that there weren't lodges within the United States that did. You had to have had some Freemasons that were members of the Illuminati, but were they in control of any lodges? Don't think so, because it would be against the law. In the lower levels, they could talk all they wanted about it, but to get together as a group, as a function, as Freemasons, they couldn't.
There was an Illuminati scare. How frightening is this? We've always known there was a Masonic lodge down the street. Could they be infiltrated by the Illuminati? Are they secretly trying to take over our government? All of this is foolishness. The Illuminati went out of business after about 10 years. They never spread beyond, much beyond Bavaria, certainly never to the United States.
It seems logical to some that Weishaupt's organization was disbanded by 1786 after it had been discovered and outlawed by the Bavarian government the year before. But others point to a letter written by George Washington on October 24, 1798, 12 years after the Illuminati had supposedly ceased to function. Writing to the Reverend G.W. Schneider, Washington acknowledged the presence of Illuminati doctrines at work in America. The Reverend Schneider had sent Washington a copy of the book, Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, by Professor John Robeson, saying that his book gives a full account of a society of Freemasons that distinguishes itself by the name of Illuminati, whose plan is to overturn all government and all religion. When Washington responded, he said, "It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more truly satisfied of this fact than I am." We asked Dr. Morris to comment on the letter, but he told us he was unaware of it. The letter itself may be found among the George Washington papers at the Library of Congress. In this letter, Washington associates the Illuminati with the Jacobins, the radical French group that launched the French Revolution. Many writers and historians over the last 2 centuries have concluded that the power behind the Jacobins was in fact the Illuminati. It is well documented that some of the Jacobins came to America and here tried to stir up a second American Revolution through groups known as the Democratic Clubs. The Jacobins, who by this time had overthrown King Louis, sent their ambassador, Edmond Genet, to America to build support for the French Revolution. American leaders like Washington wanted to keep the country neutral, but Genet was determined to bring her into the fray, even if it meant overthrowing the new American government. In a letter from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson, Adams wrote, "You certainly never felt the terrorism excited by Genet in 1793, when 10,000 people in the streets of Philadelphia, day after day, threatened to drag Washington out of his house and effect a revolution in the government, or compel it to declare war in favor of the French Revolution." Many researchers believe the French Revolution is the key to understanding the presence of the Illuminati in America. Because the revolution in France had been so reckless and bloody, most of America's leaders were appalled by it, except for one, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson spent 5 years as the American minister to France and was an ardent supporter of the French Revolution during the planning stages. He even allowed his residence to be used as a meeting place for the rebels, who were led by the Marquis de Lafayette. When Jefferson heard about the bloodshed in France during the Reign of Terror, he said that rather than see the revolution fail, I would have seen half the earth desolated. Were there but an Adam and Eve left in every country, left free, it would be better than as it now is. Jefferson predicted that the ball of liberty would roll around the globe. The hand rolling this ball would be, undoubtedly, the clenched fist of revolution. For many researchers, the presence of the all-seeing eye floating above an unfinished pyramid stands as clearest proof of the Illuminati at work in America.
Is the Illuminati to be defined as Freemasons and Rosicrucians and other secret society members? If that's the case, then yes, I believe the symbol on the dollar bill, the truncated pyramid, is directly related to the Illuminati.
Dr. James Billington, the Librarian of Congress, is pictured here beside First Lady Laura Bush. His relationship with President Bush is unknown, but we are given cause to wonder at it. According to Dr. Billington, it was the Bavarian Illuminati that put the fire in the minds of men and compelled them toward a global revolution to change the world. Is it possible that this philosophy is at work in America today?
By our efforts, we have lit a fire as well, a fire in the minds of men. It warms those who feel its power. It burns those who fight its progress. And one day, this untamed fire of freedom will reach the darkest corners of our world.
Could President Bush have been implying what it seems? Is America currently being driven by the same revolutionary fire that inspired the Bavarian Illuminati? Bush is often said to be a fundamentalist Christian, but some of his critics claim his views are more ecumenical. As with Freemasonry, Bush believes in other routes to finding God.
We all worship the same God, Christian and Muslim?
I think we do.
We
have different routes of getting to the Almighty.
Do Christians and non-Christians, do Muslims go to heaven, in your mind?
Yes, they do. We have different routes of getting there.
Is Bush's real belief a clue to understanding his membership in Skull and Bones? And is Skull and Bones, the elite secret society, somehow related to a modern form of the Illuminati?
The Illuminati was a secret society. It existed in Europe, started in 1776. It infiltrated the upper echelons of Masonry, and that is how it has managed to exist since that time.
A chief piece of evidence is the radical presence of Citizen Genet. Genet is said to be responsible for the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794.
And George Washington actually sent an army to put down this revolution that was incited by Citizen Genet, who was the French ambassador to the United States, who was a Jacobin, and the Jacobins were simply a front name for the Illuminati. The Illuminati was here.
In 1798, the same year George Washington wrote his letter to the Reverend Schneider, another Reverend, Jedediah Morse, gave a speech in which he claimed that the Illuminati had its emissaries at work in America. Morse also associated the Illuminati with the French Jacobins. Among the chief icons of the Jacobins was the red cap worn by the French revolutionaries, known as the Phrygian cap, or the Cap of Liberty. Easily recognized as a cap that, when worn, was often pulled forward, though sometimes to the side. The cap was not only worn by the French rebels, but was often shown symbolically at the end of a staff or upon the head of their goddess of liberty, Marianne, as in this famous painting that glorifies the French Revolution. This same Phrygian cap is found among the great seals of a number of U.S. states, on the official seal of the U.S. Army, and on the library. The Phrygian cap dates back to ancient Rome and was said to be worn by slaves who had obtained their freedom, and as such became a symbol of liberty. The chief god worshipped at that time was Mithras, who is seen in many images and sculptures wearing this headpiece. Like the gods Baal and the Egyptian Horus, Mithras was a dying god who was later resurrected. In the pantheon of pagan gods, Mithras occupies the place of the Masonic Christ. The Phrygian cap is also associated with the mythical figure of Ganymede, often portrayed as a handsome young man wearing this cap of liberty. Because of his beauty, Ganymede was carried away by Zeus in the form of an eagle and made the cupbearer of the gods. In time, Zeus gave him a place in the heavens, where he became the constellation Aquarius. Throughout the 20th century, esoteric teachers have taught that mankind is entering into the Age of Aquarius, also called the New Age. In fact, Freemasonry's premier publication, the Scottish Rite Journal, was once called the New Age magazine. The Phrygian caps are also seen in this image of the ancient Magi, who followed the star at the birth of Christ. Freemasonry teaches that this is where the Eastern Star gets its name.
The use of that is actually deceptive, because if you think about it, the three wise men were in the east. They were probably Persian, and they were looking west and saw the star in Bethlehem. So what that passage means is we have seen his star while we were in the east and looking west. That only makes sense geographically.
Nevertheless, esoterics have long believed that the star looked upon by the Magi was in fact Sirius, the blazing star that brings light from the east.
It is about a much more ancient connection to the Magi, to, we three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts who traveled so far. Those Magi are Zoroastrian.
Yet not everyone accepts that the Magi were originally followers of Zoroaster. Many Bible scholars believe the Magi were Persians, who were influenced by the writings of the Old Testament prophet Daniel, who lived in that region during the time of Nebuchadnezzar the Great. One of the titles given to Daniel was Rav Mag, or Chief of the Magi. In his writings, Daniel was inspired by an angel who gave him a timeline in which to expect the Christ of Israel. Many scholars believe the Magi were in fact following the prophecies of Daniel. In contrast, Freemasons believe they were Zoroastrian mystics, guided by the star Sirius, and hence Sirius came to represent the Masonic concept of the Christ. This image shows the prophet Zoroaster wearing a Phrygian cap. Yet Zoroaster is most often portrayed with a beard, wearing a robe, belted at the waist, with an Eastern head garment. The name had to be at least one of the origins of the Masonic pentagram, which leads us, by far, to the most controversial element in the design for Washington, D.C.
There is a pentagram that is produced by the angles of the streets and avenues to the north of the White House.
You see the goat of Mendes appearing, the ears, the entire goat of Mendes, and the inverted five-pointed star, which is the goat of Mendes, built into the streets of Washington, D.C. No one could have that happen accidentally.
I've heard sillier things, but not much. No, there are no satanic plans in the street plans of Washington, D.C.
The presence of a pentagram in the street layout of Washington, D.C. is said to represent the darkest influence of Masonry in America's capital, and is the driving force behind images such as this one, which suggests that all the other buildings and monuments are of satanic origin. As many are aware, the presence of the pentagram is greatly disputed. During the Middle Ages, the pentagram was a symbol of good luck and protection when used by those who practice magic.
And one of the things they came upon was the idea that if there were such things as demons and spirits, then they should be able to summon them, either just to observe them to prove that they existed, or to control them to whatever purpose they might want to. These people were, I suggest, an early form of experimental scientists as much as they were magicians. They were just trying to see what would happen. And one of the things they decided to do is if they were going to call up a spirit or a demon in a specific place, they'd draw a circle, and then they would put pentagrams at the corners as a warding sign to protect them from whatever danger that demon might pose to them.
The inverted pentagram is seen as a highly satanic symbol. Meanwhile, placing a goat's head in the center of it is most often blamed on 19th century French occultist Eliphas Levi,
who arbitrarily decided to say that the pentagram, one point up was a positive good luck, good fortune symbol, and 1 point down was a negative evil symbol. He provided no citations as to where he got that idea from, and there was nothing historically documented prior to him to suggest that anyone ever thought that was the case.
This is an important issue because Eliphas Levi was arguably the most influential occultist of the 19th and 20th centuries.
He was probably the most powerful sorcerer of the 19th century.
His writings inspired every major occult leader, including Madame H.P. Blavatsky, Aleister Crowley, Manly P. Hall, and Albert Pike.
Yes, indeed, Pike does quote Levi in his writings.
Levi's concept of the pentagram was most likely the influence of the 15th century German alchemist Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. Agrippa is a well-known figure in occult circles and is even mentioned in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, as well as J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Agrippa published his books on occult philosophy around 1509. Today, his collection is called the Foundation Book of Western Occultism. In this book, he features an inverted pentagram and calls it the Pentagram of Pythagoras. According to Pythagoras, the inverted pentagram symbolized the 5 chambers of Tartarus, one of the Greek words for hell. But the Pythagoreans believed descending into this underworld led one to a path of higher wisdom. Hence the symbolism of Dante's Inferno, in which Dante descends into hell so that he can later enter into paradise. The Pythagoreans also believed that from this 5-chambered Tartarus came the world's demon, or evil spirit. The German-based Illuminati, with their Pythagorean passion, would have certainly been familiar with this belief, as would the rest of the revolutionary occultists in France, who could very well have influenced Pierre L'Enfant and Thomas Jefferson. First, we must address the main issue, raised by every researcher. Is there really a pentagram in the street layout of the city?
One segment of the pentagram is missing.
I started to look carefully at the maps and draw my lines, and then I find out that, hey, it's not a real 5-pointed star. It doesn't have legs.
And you can draw a pentagram over some of the major streets, but the streets don't actually connect to form a pentagram.
There's absolutely no doubt that a partial pentagram appears in the street designs of Washington. You can look at a satellite photo of Washington, D.C. and see the pentagram. It seems to be symmetric around 16th Street, which is the street that runs into the White House. If you look at the earliest published maps of the District of Columbia, the design that was laid out by Pierre L'Enfant, you can see this partial pentagram. But it is just that, a partial pentagram. Rhode Island Avenue does not connect all the way through to Connecticut. I've always wondered to myself if we Masons are so all-fired powerful that we can have this satanic device put in the streets, how come we weren't smart enough or powerful enough to have it completed? But as I understand the use of the pentagram, it's the fact that it is a complete symbol that gives it its power and force. I've never heard of anything being associated with an uncompleted pentagram.
Dr. Morris's assertion is a well-known symbol in the occult. Manly P. Hall writes of the uses of the pentagram in his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. He says, the pentagram is used extensively in black magic. The star may be broken at one point by not permitting the converging lines to touch. It may be inverted by having 1 point down and 2 up. When used in black magic, the pentagram is called the sign of the cloven hoof, or the footprint of the devil. Of course, Hall wrote these things in the early part of the 20th century. But is there a record of a partial pentagram found during the Revolutionary era? The answer is yes. In fact, it is a record that shows up during the same time that the street design for Washington, D.C. was being laid out by Pierre L'Enfant, and is mentioned in the play Faust by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Goethe published the first edition of Faust in 1790, in which he mentions a partial pentagram in the dialogue between Faust and Mephistopheles, the devil whom he has conjured. Mephistopheles says, "Let me go up. I cannot go away. A little hindrance bids me stay." To which Faust replies, "The pentagram? That's in your way? You son of hell, explain to me, if that stays you, how came you in today?" To which Mephistopheles says, "Observe it closely. It is not well made. One angle on the outer side of it is just a little open, as you see." While Goethe published his first edition of Faust in 1790, it was between 1791 and 1792 that Pierre L'Enfant drew up the initial street design for Washington, D.C. This might all be seen as a mere coincidence, if not for the fact that Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was not only a master mason, but also a famous member of the Bavarian Illuminati. The Builder magazine, a Masonic publication, in September 1923, said of Goethe that it is no wonder that German Freemasons point with pride to his connection with their order. After he became a member in 1780, he accomplished no great work which did not ring in Masonic accord. He completed nothing which did not lead back to a Masonic origin. Meanwhile, Masonic author Michael Bagent writes that Goethe not only depicted a Faust figure, he was himself a Faust figure, an adjunct of his own personal Hermetic quest. But could Goethe's ideas of Hermetic philosophy have influenced the design for Washington, D.C.? And how might an unfinished pentagram reflect the Hermetic principle of as above, so below? Which brings us to what may be the most logical explanation for the unfinished pentagram in Washington, D.C., and one that seems to fit perfectly with the rest of the design for the city, a city which David Oveson calls a city of the stars.
I have seen it suggested that the unfinished nature of the pentagram in Washington, D.C. bears a resemblance to the unfinished pentagram design that is seen in the motion of Venus. Of course, Venus has a lot of retrograde motion because it is between us and the sun. And in relation to the other stars, Venus, of course, moves around a lot, but it in effect draws against the backdrop a nearly complete pentagram.
The cycles of Venus rotating around the sun happen over an 8-year period, during which Venus hits 5 points in the heavens, which form the outline of a pentagram. The female aspect of Venus is the celestial Virgin, which David Oveson argues was the chief inspiration for aligning Washington, D.C. with the stars.
It would support his theory that there was an intentional astronomical relationship in the layout of the city.
In fact, Oveson mentions this motion of Venus, relating it to the 5-petaled flower, many of which appear throughout Washington, D.C., which represent the path of Venus as shown in this drawing from a well-known book on astronomy from the 18th century. Now, what about the broken pentagram? Most astrologers plot the 8-year course of Venus in relation to the zodiac, and their diagrams look like this. But according to Theosophic author David Pratt, this is not entirely correct. He says that while Venus produces a 5-pointed star or pentagram, there is a slight irregularity. For the pentagram is not completely closed, there being a difference of 2 days at the top, which could mean that the broken pentagram of Venus might look something like this. But which conclusion seems most plausible? Is the pentagram merely an accident? Or does it represent some arcane magical ceremony? Or is it simply a reflection of Venus, according to the Hermetic principle, as above, so below?
With symbols, there are always multiple levels, up to 7 different levels of interpretation.
One interpretation of the pentagram is given by the Thelemic order of the Golden Dawn, which says that the pentagram is itself a perfect geometric symbol of the perfected man. Meanwhile, Eliphas Levi writes that the angels aspire to become men, for the perfect man, the man-God, is above even angels. Which brings us to the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. The building itself is surrounded by 72 massive columns. The number 72 is said to represent the most arcane figure in numerology. The reasons for this vary. The heart of man beats 72 times per minute. The sun drops back against the zodiac every 72 years. The pyramid on the dollar bill was designed with 72 stones. 7 plus 2 equals 9, which, in the occult, is the number of finality. And 9 is considered a reverse 6, which is said to be the number of the perfect man. And so it seems no accident that we should find 6 stars above the head of a figure sitting on a throne overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue, the hypotenuse of Federal Triangle. Beneath him on either side are the figures of a male and a female, with himself in between. Manly Hall wrote about America's assignment with destiny, while FDR spoke of her rendezvous with destiny. Is it any wonder, then, that according to the National Archives, the figure on a throne overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue is named Destiny? Could this be a picture of the Masonic Christ? And how might he differ from the Christ of the Bible? But even now, the face of Christ is changing in the world. In New York, at the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine, we find a mysterious image hovering above the altar, where a traditional crucifix would be. There are no nails in his hands, and no crown of thorns upon his head. Instead, we find a robed figure, belted at the waist, with a Zoroastrian-looking cap upon his head, rays of light shining behind him. Could this be the Christ of the New Age? But even now there are those who believe such a figure is about to take his place on the world stage. In 1982, an English painter named Benjamin Creme took out full-page ads in newspapers around the world declaring the Christ is now here. For more than 20 years now, Creme has traveled the world telling all nations that the Christ, whom he calls Maitreya, is about to appear.
Maitreya is standing by, ready to come into the world at any moment.
We caught up with Mr. Creme in August of 2006, as he had just come from speaking to an independent group at the United Nations. He had this to say to America.
It's the duty of the American people to respond to Maitreya and to accept their destiny.
It was on May 14, 1982, that Creme held a press conference to announce that the Christ, Maitreya, was ready to emerge. May 14th was also the date of the rebirth of the nation of Israel in 1948. With all the bloodshed and conflict happening in the Middle East, we asked Creme what he thought it might take to bring peace to the region.
I've always said it will take Maitreya to solve it.
Prophecy teachers warn that the current roadmap to peace, followed by President Bush, is really a roadmap to Armageddon. Meanwhile, Creme says the solution is the universal Christ, which he claims is awaited by all religions.
2,600 years ago, Gautama Buddha made a prophecy. It's in one of the sutras. That at this time would come into the world another great teacher, a Buddha like himself, by name Maitreya, who by dint of his extraordinary spiritual stature would galvanize and inspire humanity to create a brilliant golden civilization based, as he put it, on righteousness and truth. Maitreya is the name of Maitreya Buddha. All the religions are awaiting him. The Muslims are awaiting a teacher they call, or a prophet they call the Imam Mahdi. The Hindus are awaiting the return of Krishna or Kalki Avatar. Buddhists are awaiting Maitreya Buddha. He is in fact the world teacher for this age, the age of Aquarius, which is beginning now.
But how have Krem's teachings been received by Christians who are awaiting the return of Jesus Christ?
Jesus Christ teaches very clearly, I said, I'm the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father but through me. If we want to try to bring everything together and say, hey, we all worship the same God, well, then we're going to find ourselves offending the one true God.
Many of them believe that what I'm talking about is what they call the Antichrist. Some even think I'm the Antichrist. Many of them think, if I'm not the Antichrist, I'm the leg man for the Antichrist.
Krem is very significant to the New Age movement because he's kind of like the John the Baptist of the New Age movement. He even as John the Baptist was the voice crying in the wilderness that the Messiah had come, at Jesus' first coming. Krem believes that he's the one who's heralding his second coming. However, it's a New Age Christ. It's not the Jesus Christ of the Bible. And he comes in a way that the New Age Christ or the Antichrist is portrayed to come, not the way Jesus Christ is coming.
You don't know what the Antichrist is. The Antichrist is not a man. It's an energy. It's an energy, destructive energy, deliberately released to break down the old order. It's in Revelations of St. John, if you know. The beast 666, the number of a man, is the Antichrist, Nero. The Emperor Nero, it was released through the Emperor Nero to bring about the dissolution of the Roman dispensation to prepare the way for Christendom.
Oddly enough, Krem's teaching is very similar to a doctrine taught in the Christian community called preterism.
Preterism comes from a Latin word that means past.
In a nutshell, preterism teaches that the prophecies from the book of Revelation were fulfilled by 70 AD, a teaching many Christians reject.
It's really a recipe for apostasy to set up the church for the Antichrist.
While many prophecy teachers warn that the coming of an Antichrist is imminent, Benjamin Krem strongly disagrees.
It has been, it has gone, it's done its destructive work and made possible for the Christ himself to return to the world.
Could Benjamin Krem be right? Were all the prophecies concerning the Antichrist fulfilled in the past? And does the world now stand ready to receive the Masonic Christ of the new Aquarian age? And what can this mean for America? Even now, some believe that America's true destiny is to establish the kingdom of God on earth. Could they be right? Is this the key to understanding the secret architecture of Washington, D.C.?
Maitreya himself spoke to me. He said, I myself am coming, sooner than anyone thinks possible, and he will face humanity with a choice. Create justice in the world and build the most brilliant civilization this earth has ever seen, or perish utterly. That's the choice.